On March 2, 1942, Japanese destroyers found USS Perch beneath the Java Sea. Their depth charges had already compressed her hull inward by 2 feet. Water poured through 17 different breaches as she kept diving. By every engineering calculation, she should have imploded in the next 60 seconds. But she didn't. Inside, her captain vented compressed air and fuel to the surface, desperately hoping the oil slick and bubbles would convince the destroyers the sub was wrecked. Below, 59 men froze in absolute silence as bulkheads groaned and toxic fumes filled the air. Their boat was dying, and they were trapped. USS Perch took shape in the Groton shipyards in early 1935. She was a Porpoise-class submarine, one of the first modern American diesel-electrics, laid down on February 25th and launched on May 9, 1936. Helen Lorena Withers stood on the platform that morning and sent her sliding into the water. Her husband, Thomas Withers Jr., would go on to wear an admiral's stars. Commissioned that November, Perch measured just over 300 feet from bow to stern, roughly the length of a modern NFL field, with a beam of 26 feet and a draft of 15 feet. On the surface, she displaced 1,350 tons. Submerged, that jumped to nearly 2,000 tons, comparable to the weight of about 1,500 family cars. 4 powerful 16-cylinder Winton diesel engines spun generators that powered 8 GE electric motors, delivering enough thrust to push Perch through open sea at just over 19 knots, around 22 miles per hour, making her faster on the surface than many coastal vessels of the era. Submerged, her speed dropped to 8.75 knots, less than half her surface pace, and she could only maintain that for about 10 hours before battery reserves ran low, forcing her to surface or reduce speed drastically. Her surface range was an impressive 11,000 nautical miles at cruising speed, long enough to cross the Atlantic Ocean and return without refueling. This endurance made Perch well-suited for sustained operations far from friendly ports, a necessity given the sprawling distances of the Pacific Theater. She was built for patrol and strike missions, equipped with 6 21-inch torpedo tubes, 4 forward, 2 aft, carrying 16 torpedoes. These were her main weapons, capable of damaging or sinking large ships, but torpedoes of the era were prone to failure, and reloading tubes was slow under pressure. A 4-inch duck gun allowed attacks on smaller vessels without wasting torpedoes, but using it required surfacing, risking detection. 2 twin 30-caliber machine guns provided limited defense against aircraft and small boats, useful but no match against heavier threats. Each weapon had limits. Torpedoes needed precise use. The deck gun exposed the sub, and machine guns offered minimal protection, but together they balanced offense and survival. As for crew, Perch carried 5 officers and 45 enlisted men below deck in cramped quarters built for endurance and efficiency on long patrols. In 1937, Perch joined Submarine Squadron 6 in the Pacific Fleet, operating in cold northern waters around the Bering Sea and Aleutians. In spring 1939, she cruised with the fleet to the East Coast, then returned west to Manila, becoming a division flagship. From the Philippines, she patrolled China's coast in 1940, visiting Tsingtao and Shanghai. Throughout the tense year before the war, she watched Japan's moves closely. 1 week before Pearl Harbor, Perch escorted the 4th Marine Regiment from China, meeting transports off Shanghai and delivering them safely to the Philippines. The war hadn't started, but Perch was already on patrol. War reached USS Perch just after dawn on December 8, 1941, one day after the attack on Pearl Harbor. She was moored at Cavite Navy Yard in the Philippines, under the command of Lieutenant Commander David A. Hurt, when the first alerts came through. 2 days later, Japanese bombers swept over Cavite Navy Yard, unleashing a fierce attack that turned the base into a raging firestorm. Amid the bombardment, Perch played a crucial role in clearing the wreckage and rescuing personnel. Despite their efforts, most of Cavite was reduced to ruins, crippling the Navy's presence in the Philippines early in the war. With the base crippled and enemy forces closing in, Perch got underway. She threaded her way through the minefields off Corregidor and began her first war patrol in the deep waters between Luzon and Formosa. The orders were clear: find Japanese shipping, report movement, and take shots where possible. Patrols shifted north toward Hong Kong. Then, on December 25th, a large merchant ship appeared on the horizon. Perch fired 4 torpedoes. all missed. Days later, another opportunity. This time, a Japanese cargo vessel named Nojima Maru. Perch fired again and made her escape as escorts closed in. She was unable to observe the result, but the ship was later confirmed sunk. The damage Perch sustained during this patrol was minor, but she had pushed hard. After weeks of hunting, she broke off and sailed south for repairs, making several more attacks along the way. None successful. She reached Darwin, Australia in early 1942 and was quickly turned around for a second patrol. The Java Sea was now the front line. On February 3, 1942, Perch slipped out of Darwin and headed back into action. The Japanese were advancing fast. Borneo had fallen, and Java was next. From February 8th through 23rd, Perch prowled the islands, relaying reports of enemy concentrations and watching for convoys. She made 2 unsuccessful attacks, and then, on February 25th, took a hit. The shell came from Japanese patrol vessel's deck gun during a surface engagement near the Makassar Strait. It struck the conning tower's antenna trunk dead on, crushing the metal framework and severing critical radio cables. From that moment forward, Perch could still receive transmissions through her auxiliary antennas, but her ability to transmit was severely compromised. She could barely push signals more than a few miles, a crippling limitation for a submarine that needed to report enemy positions to headquarters. 2 days later, she reported a sighting, 2 cruisers and 3 destroyers just off the coast of Java. That was the last clear message anyone received. Perch had been ordered to head for Fremantle, Australia after her patrol. On February 28th, her final orders came in. Disregard previous patrol boundaries and intercept a large enemy convoy approaching Java. On the evening of March 1st, 1942, Perch surfaced about 30 nautical miles northwest of Surabaya. She was running surfaced to make better speed when suddenly 2 Japanese destroyers cut directly across her path, Amatsukaze and Hatsukaze. These were Kagero-class destroyers, built for blistering speed and carrying 8 24-inch torpedo tubes and 6 dual-purpose guns, poised to unleash devastating spreads. They sliced through the waves as convoy escorts. Lookouts on Amatsukaze spotted Perch first, catching her silhouette against the dark sea. Without hesitation, Amatsukaze's 5-inch guns roared to life. Shells shrieked through the air, splashing dangerously close. The water exploded around Perch as the destroyer's fire fell fast and hard. There was no time to lose. Perch's captain ordered a crash dive, plunging the submarine into the dark depths to escape the hail of shells. Inside the sub, lights flickered as she dropped beneath the surface. Her crew leveled her off and tried to maneuver for a shot, closing in to within 800 to 1,000 yards, but the destroyers were already bearing down. They knew where she was, and they were setting up a depth charge run. Perch climbed 90 feet to try and evade. 12 charges fell into the water, classic Type 95 depth charges, each carrying approximately 220 pounds of explosives set to detonate at measured depths. The first pattern missed, erupting astern, but 4 from the second pattern came close, very close. As they exploded, the pressure wave hammered Perch's hull. Rivets popped, steel plating groaned and bent. Valves jammed, seals wept, gaskets tore loose. Water slid in through the hull. Gauges were wreckage. The port shaft lifeless. The margin for survival had narrowed to a thread. Up above, the destroyers circled once more and then moved off, assuming the sub had broken up below them. The assumption wasn't accidental. As the depth charges hammered the hull, Lieutenant Commander Hurt ordered compressed air released from the ballast tanks while diesel fuel poured from open valves. The oil slick and bubble field rose to the surface, classic signs of a submarine breaking apart. Inside Perch, the crew maintained absolute silence for 20 minutes while Japanese sonar pinged off their hull. Men barely breathed. Water dripped through sprung seams, but no one moved to patch them. Not until the destroyer's engines faded into the distance. The Perch was still going, just barely. The hull had held. Internal bulkheads remained sealed. The crew stayed on emergency stations, managing trim and watching water levels. 2 hours later, just after midnight, Perch surfaced, clearly battered, but still fighting. She turned slowly east. The crew immediately began damage assessment. Despite everything, hope clung to the wreck, but only if they could patch her up in time and vanish before the enemy circled back. Early on March 2nd, Perch lay on the surface, still reeling from the damage from the attack. Both periscope tubes were flooded and unusable, cutting off the submarine's eyes beneath the waves. Inside, only half of her main engines still responded, limiting speed and maneuverability. The Japanese patrolled these waters aggressively. Any mistake could bring another attack. Yet the men scrambled onto the rain-slicked deck without hesitation, knowing their survival depended on rapid repairs. The hull plating had been pushed inward between 18 and 24 inches along the port side, far beyond design tolerances. Chief machinist's mates worked to shore up the warped metal with timber braces, knowing the weakened steel might buckle completely on the next dive. The 3-inch circulating water line had ruptured, flooding the pump room. Without it, they couldn't cool the remaining engines properly, limiting them to short bursts of power before overheating. Broken ventilation valves had to be forced shut to prevent dangerous flooding of vital compartments. The engine room hatch leaked badly, threatening to swamp the machinery below. Open seams and torn gaskets were sealed with whatever materials were at hand. Canvas, rubber, even wooden wedges. All of these would have to hold, even under the immense pressure of the deep. But every movement carried urgency, and every sound risked detection. Working in darkness made the repairs a struggle. The ever-present threat of destroyers kept the crew tense and alert, ready to dive at a moment's notice, even though Perch's damaged systems made submerging slow and perilous. The crew quietly celebrated fixed patches and closed valves as small victories. Each repair brought the submarine precious hours. Despite the damage, their spirit held firm. Their mission wasn't over. They still hoped to strike back at the Japanese convoy. Just before sunrise, the crew scrambled to wrap up repairs. Out of the gray horizon came Ushio and Sazanami, Fubuki-class warships, widely regarded as the world's first modern destroyers. Fast, heavily armed, and ahead of their time, each bristled with 6 24-inch torpedo tubes and 6 5-inch guns. They tore through the sea like hounds on the scent. They'd spotted Perch on the surface. Alarms blared. The crew scrambled, rushing to dive stations with urgent speed. But damage from the earlier depth charge barrage had crippled their systems. Perch struggled to respond, the sluggish engines and flooded compartments slowing her every move. She slipped beneath the waves, pushing down toward 200 feet, yet the destroyers closed fast. The destroyers wasted no time. They unleashed a fresh barrage of depth charges, pounding the water around Perch. The shockwaves slammed into the already battered hull. Inside, systems groaned and failed. The crew fought to control the submarine, but their efforts were in vain. Propulsion failed completely. Steering became unresponsive. Perch lay motionless in the deep, a sitting target. Ushio and Sazanami pressed the attack, dropping pattern after pattern of depth charges. The assault continued well into daylight. Eventually, the destroyers pulled back, convinced their target was sunk. Water poured in from multiple breaches, through the conning tower hatch, the engine room hatch, and leaking seams along the hull. The ruptured 3-inch circulating waterline flooded critical compartments, and the pump strained against the rising tide. Inside, the heat and humidity climbed, suffocating the crew and choking the engines. One by one, systems failed. The pressure hull filled with seawater, and the submarine's sluggish response made diving impossible. The officers gathered. There was no choice left. To stay submerged meant sinking deeper into darkness and flood. With heavy hearts, they ordered Perch to surface, exposing her battered frame to enemy eyes, but buying a slim chance to live and fight another day. Damage control parties worked desperately, and after some time, they managed to get one of her 4 engines running, just enough for 5 knots, barely managing a slow, crippled drift on the surface. After covering a minimal distance, they decided to try to dive again. Perch lurched uncontrollably, water pouring in faster than it could be managed. The submarine pitched dangerously, nearly slipping beneath the waves without control. The crew fought desperately to avoid sinking outright. The grim truth settled in. Perch was now completely incapable of underwater travel. She was forced to remain on the surface, exposed in enemy waters. Despite the damage and danger, the crew held on to the slim hope of escape or rescue. By evening, Perch was a crippled hulk, a survivor clinging to the surface of a hostile sea. One engine barely crawled. The rest lay silent. Gears mangled, electrics shorted, batteries leaking acid. The submarine's defenses had failed. The 4-inch deck gun was inoperative. Torpedoes, damaged by enemy depth charges, were stuck in their tubes, with firing mechanisms unsafe to use. Inside, the crew faced mounting tension. Heat and noxious gases mixed with exhaustion and nerves. Scuttling had been discussed since before the attack, and the crew had prepared for it. The plan was clear. If Perch became unsalvageable and in danger of capture, she would be deliberately sunk to prevent enemy forces from seizing classified materials and technology. But every effort was made to buy time to keep the submarine afloat and avoid surrender. They pushed on with desperate repairs, working on the deck to patch leaks and close watertight hatches. Then, on the evening of March 3rd, the enemy returned. Ushio and Sazanami searchlights swept the water once more. Ushio broke the tense silence, her main battery roared, and the first shell slammed into Perch's conning tower, tearing through what little remained of the battered structure. The blast shattered any hope of escape. Damage deepened, systems failing fast. Then the order came: scuttle the submarine. Lieutenant Kenneth Schacht led a team below to destroy the code books and cipher machines. They smashed the ECM equipment beyond recognition while water rose around them. Hull valves were thrown open, seawater flooding in to claim the crippled vessel. Perch was being surrendered to the depths by her own crew. Shells screamed overhead as crew members raced to abandon ship one by one, slipping into the cold water while enemy fire peppered the surface. Every second counted. Perch was flooding fast, sinking beneath them as they fought to get clear. Below, the submarine's final dive began, a slow, controlled descent into the depths, slipping away from the surface for the last time. Finally, the destroyers ceased fire. Their target was gone, but so were the chances of capturing a U.S. submarine and discovering her secrets. All 59 men aboard Perch escaped before she slipped beneath the waves. Moments later, the Japanese destroyer Ushio hauled them from the water. They were now prisoners of war. Taken to the newly occupied Dutch East Indies, they were sent to forced labor camps where they endured crushing work under brutal conditions that stretched on for years. The war moved on, but they remained trapped, isolated, and forgotten. The U.S. Navy had no idea what had happened. In April 1942, Perch was listed as missing. Nearly a year later, a Japanese radio broadcast claimed that some of the crew had survived and were being held on Shikoku, one of the home islands. But this was not true. The real location, likely kept secret to avoid Allied bombing, was deep in occupied Indonesia. It wasn't until Japan's surrender in August 1945 that the truth finally surfaced. Most of Perch's crew had survived, and they'd been prisoners in Southeast Asia all along. Despite the hardships, most men survived the ordeal. 5 or 6 men succumbed, primarily to malnutrition and the brutal conditions of captivity. When the war ended on BJ Day, the survivors returned to their families, marked by their experience, but alive. Lieutenant Kenneth Schacht received the Navy Cross for his role during Perch's final moments. He helped oversee the scuttling to prevent the Japanese from capturing classified codebooks, materials, and equipment. Schacht later explained how they managed to buy time during the submarine's final fight. Quote, "Loss of air and oil during attacks caused both previous enemy groups to believe their target had been destroyed." Perch's story was later dramatized in an episode of the television anthology series The Silent Service, which aired from 1957 to 58. The wreck of Perch was discovered on November 23, 2006, Thanksgiving Day, by an international team of divers aboard MV Empress. It rested northwest of Bowen Island in the Java Sea. When news of the discovery reached 85-year-old survivor Robert Lentz at his Arkansas home, he expressed keen interest in seeing what his boat looked like after all these years. Only 5 of Perch's crew were still alive by then. Lentz added with dry humor, quote, "I left $35 in my locker on the boat. It's probably still there." Because the entire crew abandoned ship and survived, the wreck is not considered a war grave. But as one of 52 U.S. submarines lost during World War II, USS Perch remains, quote, "on eternal patrol."